Steven Spielberg has been frequently characterized as a sketch of an isolated human being who doesn't always know everything about himself, a man whose personality is partly constructed by the way people think about him, what people think about him, what the critics write, or even what photographs hold in brief moments. But when it comes to filmmaking, Spielberg has always been clear about who he was and what he wanted. For more than half a century, he has been regarded as one of Hollywood's most revered directors, revolutionizing the face of cinema through movies such as Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, Schindler's List, and countless others. He has presented audiences with forever classics that redefined categories, extended the boundaries of technology, and combined spectacle and humanity in a manner no other could. But off-camera, Spielberg's career has been far from smooth. For all of his mythic discipline and his skill at coaxing out incredible performances, he has also experienced conflicts with performers whose behavior, Weltanschauung, or plain personality disrupted the careful equipoise he insisted on at his sets. Spielberg is famous for regarding filmmaking as a kind of holy co-creation in which professionalism, discipline, and respect are paramount. He prizes loyalty, humility, and mutual effort above all. And though he is not often one to speak out publicly against anyone, once things turn sour in terms of relationships, he silently and irrevocably closes the door. There have been a few actors Spielberg clearly or tacitly determined he didn't want to work with anymore throughout the decades, feuds that expose the flesh and blood side of Hollywood legends and the frequently unspoken wars behind the silver screen. One of the earliest and most infamous of those was Julia Roberts. When Roberts, riding high on the box office smash Pretty Woman, was hired to play Tinker Bell in Spielberg's 1991 fantasy hook, the pairing promised greatness. Spielberg was reinventing Peter Pan for a new age, with Robin Williams as Peter grown-up, Dustin Hoffman as Captain Hook, and Roberts lending star power as the spunky fairy. But magic turned to mayhem instead. Tinker Bell demanded that Roberts spend the bulk of her time alone on green-screen isolation stages, shooting scenes with tennis balls and giant props while her co-stars had exciting scenes together. The part was technically grueling, emotionally exhausting, and deeply isolating. Crew members would gossip that she appeared miserable and detached, and even earned the nasty sobriquet of Tinkerhell. Meanwhile, her private life was also disintegrating as her engagement to Kiefer Sutherland fell apart mid-production. The anguish of that very public heartbreak combined with the pressure of an already demanding shoot. Roberts herself subsequently conceded to feeling left alone and unsupported, that she believed the ones who would cover her back simply didn't. Spielberg, on the other hand, was fighting to keep runaway costs under control as shooting overran by 40 days and his patience was strained. He was gracious in subsequent interviews, deeming it an unfortunate time that he and Roberts had been working together, but the implication was clear. He never hired her again. Roberts, however, wasn't so shy. In a Vanity Fair interview, she admitted that she felt betrayed when Spielberg didn't stand up for her against the Tinker Hell rumor mill. She called it the moment she finally felt she had a turncoat among her ranks. The resentment stuck, and although Roberts outgrew the nickname and moved on to even more success, she never reconciled with Spielberg. For a director known to reuse actors such as Tom Hanks, Harrison Ford, or Richard Dreyfuss, the lack of Roberts in his subsequent films was telling. Another rift was caused by actress Sean Young. Emerging to popularity in the early 1980s with appearances in Stripes and Blade Runner, Young first impressed Spielberg during an audition for the part of Marion Ravenwood in Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. She said she had undergone several callbacks and felt she had gotten the part. But when Spielberg finally offered the role to Karen Allen, Young did not take the rejection lying down. At a New Year's Eve party, she approached Spielberg and confronted him in the face, accusing him of having deceived her. Spielberg, typically a calm and diplomatic person, snapped back in open frustration, denying he had. To a director who valued professionalism and loyalty, a public accusation was a red flag. With time, rumors circulated that Spielberg thought she was erratic, that she had spoken out of turn on confidential matters of production, and that her chaotic energy did not mesh with his meticulously planned sets. Young afterward accused Spielberg of successfully blacklisting her, lumping him in with other powerful directors. She felt sabotaged her career by branding her difficult. Spielberg never publicly denounced her, but his silence was eloquent. He never cast her again, and in Hollywood, that silence can many times be more powerful than words. There was also Robert Shaw, whose performances in Jaws became iconic, but whose behavior on set strained Spielberg's patience. Just 27 years old, Spielberg was filming what would turn out to be one of the most significant films in film history. Shaw's acting as the seasoned shark hunter Quint provided much of the movie's grit, but on set, Shaw was turbulent. A former drinker and hard-bitten actor, he tormented his co-star Richard Dreyfuss mercilessly, pushing his patience to the limit and sabotaging him in front of the crew. At one point, Shaw dared Dreyfuss to attempt a dangerous stunt, knowing he would refuse. Spielberg described the tension as the Great Shaw-Dreyfuss feud, and it was so palpable that it arguably enhanced the on-screen hostility between their characters. Still, for a young director already battling the endless breakdowns of the mechanical shark and a production spiraling over budget, Shaw's unpredictability was yet another storm to weather. Crew members recalled him as fluctuating between brilliance and menace, delivering the iconic USS Indianapolis monologue one day and erupting in drunken outbursts the next. Spielberg would later confess that Shaw frightened him as much off-screen as he did on. Though he admired Shaw's great talent, the experience was frightening enough that Spielberg never collaborated with him again. Shaw's death just 3 years later at the age of 51 put an end to any hope of reconciliation, leaving both a mythical performance and painful remembrances. Not every conflict arose from on-set antics. With Ryan O'Neal, the problem was more one of conflicting philosophies before anything could even get underway. O'Neal, a big star of the 1970s, had the manner of a classic Hollywood leading man who was used to special treatment and deference. Spielberg, on the other hand, was rewriting the rules of how directors approached actors, cultivating collaboration and parody on his sets. Their discussions are said to have become heated as O'Neal insisted on script revisions, rescheduled timelines, and defied Spielberg's artistic control. To Spielberg, such was not only unproductive, it was poison to the collaborative ethos he held in reverence. O'Neal, in turn, dismissed Spielberg as too precious and self-indulgent, referring to his detailed, systematic approach as micromanaging. The conflict created a lasting schism, and Spielberg quietly went on to other actors who accepted his ways. Though much of O'Neal's generation found permanent niches in Spielberg's universe, O'Neal never did, his reputation for making it stick preventing that door from ever closing once and for all. Politics also were involved in one of Spielberg's nastiest splits, this time with Robert Duvall. In 2002, Spielberg visited Cuba for a U.S.-approved cultural exchange, bringing some of his films to be screened for the Cuban people and sitting with members of the country's Jewish community. But headlines centered on his sit-down with Fidel Castro, an event that provoked biting criticism. Duvall, notoriously blunt, publicly chastised Spielberg's move, wondering how the creator of movies about democracy and freedom could have a chat with a dictator. His remarks were more than criticism, bordering on outright ridicule, inferring Spielberg should construct an annex to the Holocaust Museum to commemorate the Cubans Castro murdered. He went so far as to announce he would never work for DreamWorks again. Spielberg was caught off guard, reaffirming the journey as a cultural, but not political endeavor sanctioned by the U.S. government. But Duvall's statements painted him as being in bed with tyranny, and the backlash was instant. Spielberg softly closed the door on any possible cooperation. For Duvall, it was a matter of principle. For Spielberg, it was an injury that bit too deeply to mend. Their lives never intersected again in a professional capacity, their feud locked in opposite ideologies. One of the most fascinating of Spielberg's missed links was with Marlon Brando. On paper, the combination of the detail-oriented director and the iconic actor looked like a dream team. But where Spielberg excelled in structure and discipline, Brando worked best amidst chaos. Brando insisted on improvisation, script control, and the ability to warp a film to his cadences. Spielberg, who storyboarded his productions to camera angles, viewed such requirements as an existential threat to his vision. Producer Kathleen Kennedy noted that Brando's refusal to acknowledge production realities made collaboration nearly impossible. Spielberg himself admitted privately that one cannot build large-scale films around uncertainty. Brando, meanwhile, dismissed Spielberg as part of the Hollywood machine, a filmmaker more concerned with box office than with artistic truth. He once quipped that some directors made movies like clockmakers, while he preferred to smash the clock and see what happened. Their incompatibility was so glaring that projects fell apart before they could take off. Unlike other rivalries that soften with age, this one remained frozen in position. Spielberg went on to respect Brando's genius in public, but never again tried to collaborate with him. Brando, until he died in 2004, was also dubious of the blockbuster machine Spielberg had contributed to creating. What could have been a cinematic collaboration for the ages instead proved to be one of Hollywood's greatest opportunities lost. Cumulatively, these tales tell us a lot about Spielberg's values and the secret wars of filmmaking. Whether it was Julia Roberts' troubles on Hook, Sean Young's allegations following Raiders, Robert Shaw's temperamentalism on Jaws, Ryan O'Neal's ego conflict, Robert Duvall's political criticism, or Marlon Brando's artistic disarray, Spielberg reacted the same way. Once a boundary had been transgressed, he withdrew quietly and firmly. He rarely berated, seldom fought public battles, but his quietness and his choices had finality. For a director who made his life out of teamwork, loyalty, and respect, these feuds are reminders that even the greatest legend is not beyond the vulnerable egos, ideological conflicts, and artistic crashes of Hollywood. Behind the flawless blockbusters and timeless classics are untold stories of tension and fracture, stories that shaped not only Spielberg's career, but also the careers of those who found themselves on the wrong side of his trust. And in Hollywood, where relationships often dictate opportunity, being shut out of Spielberg's orbit is one of the harshest verdicts of all.